Hi, I'm Sharon, founder of the Luca Foundation, and I'm here today with our lovely trustee board member, Andrew,
Hi.
who runs a HR company. Andrew, tell us a little bit about your company.
Thanks, Sharon. Yeah, hi. So I run a fully outsourced bespoke HR company, basically providing HR to companies who are too small to have their own in-house HR provision.
Brilliant. And I'm so appreciative of your time because you volunteer your time as a trustee and board member to the Luca Foundation. And we met actually, but you knew my dog before you even knew me because you'd seen my dog out with my husband because we live in the same village. And then we eventually met and you learnt about my charity through your partner, Denise.
Yes.
So, what was it about our charity that sort of captured you in terms of wanting to be part of our board?
Yeah, so that's pretty much spot on. My wife met you at networking herself. Denise designs jewelry. She actually, or we drove round one day to your house to drop a some jewelry round that was being donated.
Yes, that's right.
And at that point, that's when Denise and me had a discussion around who Sharon is and what Sharon does. And that was the first time I'd ever met you. And then we had more of a discussion at an event the two of us were at down in London. Such a special thing to be part of. So for me, it was an absolute no-brainer.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been quite a journey. It's helped channel my grief, and I don't know what kind of mess I would be if I didn't have the charity, to be honest. And I know that our board members see that in me, and you all know how vulnerable I can be, which I really appreciate.
We always have this thing in HR about the difference between empathy and sympathy, and the guidance around I know how you feel. And I mean, with you, firstly, the circumstances are so different to anything I could ever imagine. But separately to that, as you say, even if you've been through loss, everybody reacts to loss differently. And that would follow even in such horrific circumstances that actually you could have two people in identical circumstances being through pretty much identical loss and they would react completely differently, and neither of those reactions are wrong.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely that. Exactly. And it was actually your words that gave me the encouragement to actually become a consultant and talk to companies or HRs about the empathy side of dealing with grief. And grief comes in many forms. Like, we obviously assume grief to be the loss of a loved one, but it can also be divorce and empty nest syndrome and loss of health, change of circumstances, financial circumstances. And sadly, I have experienced all those different types of grief. In your field of HR, how have you felt these subjects have ever been approached in the workplace, and how much difference it could make?
The challenge is, and the reason why there will always be a space for what you're trying to do, is that with any form of any form of grief, if your employee comes to you and says, this is a scenario, my dad, my mum, whoever it might be, has passed away, the first thing you're very likely to say is, I'm really sorry, which, having been through grief, you don't want to hear. But it's a natural thing for somebody to say. But actually, the bit that manager needs to be empowered with is how actually to deal with it. And the whole piece around the fact that you could have two employees come to you with the same thing and react very differently.
Yes.
And when my dad passed away, I I had the day that he passed away off because, doing things for mum. I was back at work the following week. sorry, excuse me, the following day. So I
Gosh.
had the day that he
Wow.
passed away and was back the following day because I wanted to be back and back in the mill. And then I had the day off for the funeral, and I wasn't running my own business at that stage. I was in the corporate world. Um, but to what we were saying earlier, you could have an individual. Companies typically have a week of compassionate leave. It
Yeah.
varies. You could have somebody who had a week off compassionate leave and still wasn't ready to return. And as we said earlier, that's not wrong either.
Mm.
But the guidance and the support that the companies need is how to deal with those two very different circumstances.
Yeah.
And we know these conversations aren't going to go away, and difficult conversations around grief are going to become more and more prevalent as managers want to be in a situation where they can support their employee.
Yes.
The challenge is sometimes they don't know how to.
That's it. Yeah. And that's where I feel like, even HR and managers, they can't be good at
No.
everything. They could be good at their job and leading the team and getting the results for the company. And HR, whilst they're great at doing the HR roles, they don't know how to, like you say,
Mm.
support somebody going through that grief period, and that period can be, it can be for the rest of their lives. But there's going to be a period where, and
Yeah.
culturally, sometimes there's a difference. I mean, in some Asian cultures, there's a 5 week mourning period, and companies don't allow their employees to have that 5 weeks off. I remember when I first went into the working world, I was 16. I started as a trainee cashier for a high street bank, and my mum's father passed away, my grandfather, very suddenly, and I didn't know at that point that you can't take more
Mm.
than 2 days off and then you're expected to be back at work. And there's me thinking, oh, I'll get this time off and I'll help mum with my younger brothers who were quite small at that time. They were 11 and 7, I think, at the time. I was 16. And my mum was, devastated. Her father passed away suddenly, and he was very young, 58, I think he was. And it was a shock for me at that point to learn that actually in the working world you don't get time off for
Mm.
bereavement. And then that was my first sort of experience of it, and I know it hasn't got any better since, and that's been over 30 years ago. um, and this is why I feel it's really important for companies to bring in consultants like myself. There's many of us. There's not in this particular subject, but there are many of us in this area of EDI, and they shouldn't feel like they have to know everything.
Mm.
We are there to hold their hand through this. We are there to help them with employees that need a slow return back to work agreement. And I feel that they need to be more flexible in being able to do that. And I think that's where historically they've never felt that they've needed to be flexible. They just get on with what the policy is and stick to it. And then, if somebody needs extra time off, they expect them to take the time off sick.
Mm.
And then that goes against their Bradford score of certain bonuses and things that they could be entitled to, simply because their mental health needs to be looked after, because they're going through such a big change in life of the person that they've lost, or the divorce that they're going through, or the fact that they're in menopause, which is a big massive
Yep.
deal right now and is a huge in the subject in the workplace. This was interesting. I spoke to somebody recently, and you might agree that some men find it extremely hard to go and get help,
Mm.
maybe counselling, therapy, or even go to see the doctor because they're not sleeping well. And often they need that first touch, but like myself can do as a consultant, where they have to go to this workshop. It's compulsory that they do, and it could be the first steps of them realizing, actually, I do need help.
Mm.
How would you feel that in the workplace for men, if it was compulsory that they did have to go to these workshops where it's going to help them find their new normal, which is what I like to call it. It is finding your new normal after a traumatic event. How would you think it would impact men? Would it be beneficial for them to have that compulsory attendance?
Yeah, I think it's interesting with training because obviously there's a lot of focus on equality and as you were saying, sexual harassment training's a big thing right now, but actually, if you're running training sessions and workshops, etc., they're usually, if they're made to be, you tend to find that you will get better attendance for something like that if it's mandated rather than, because going back to your earlier point, if you were running it say as a drop-in, you would actually have to have the individual recognizing that there was something that they actually wanted help with.
Mm.
Whereas if they're, it's almost that realization piece that actually, these are the signs to be looking out for. So I can see a lot of benefit in that. I also think that the other side of that as well is that there is a lot of upskilling that can be done, with the managers in the businesses around things that they should be looking out for. And I always talk about the fact that with any of us, no matter how how we look on the outside, and Liam Payne is a perfect example
Yeah,
of this, of somebody who to the outside world had the absolutely perfect life,
yeah,
but when the doors closed and we're all living in our own circumstances, and I always say this, you never know what demons people are dealing with,
yes.
because it's one of those things, Sharon, where it can't fail to do any good the
Mm.
more that we talk about this. um, and this is why it's beneficial when you have the people who have the visibility and have the profile and are able to share. If they can talk about the challenges they're having, it gets it out there
Yeah.
more and more.
Do you feel we should be putting more emphasis on educating in the workplace on all the the type of support that's available, even for their children, the families, the wider families, so that they deal with it as a collective?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think if you look at something like HR, and therefore the way the business works can be quite black and white in terms of your policies. So if you were to create a compassionate leave policy, for instance, the standard would normally be, you can have up to 5 working days off, but it's it's if it's this is the group of people who we class as close family, and that's all well and good because you need to have a starting point for managers to be able to work with. But we're living in such a different world now where
Mm.
people are broke, may not have the relationship with their parents, and may have been brought up by aunties, uncles, or whoever, who they're using as mother figures and father
Yeah,
figures. One thing, more than anything else, is that every bit, yeah, every circumstance where it's grief and you're talking to the individual, more than anything else, it's got to be their individual circumstances that have considered. By all means have guidelines, because you need them, you're running a business, and you know a lot of the time the guidelines will work, but they're not there at the you know they're not there to be used every time.
mm.
It's a case of understand the circumstances and then see what's been suggested, and kind of find some. And that's why in all policies around compassionate leave and special leave, there will usually be always wording around discretionary, because you can't have you're talking about you're talking about somebody's emotions, and typically they're at their lowest.
Mm.
You can't have a one size fits all.
No,
You just can't.
no.
And I think from the work that you're doing, if managers are actually empowered to find out what the individual wants and needs and then build it round that,
Yeah.
rather than going in and saying this is what we can do, because
Yes.
it's the wrong way around.
That's it, exactly. And often, they're spending more time together than they are with their families. So
Yes.
they become their own little family.
Mm.
And I think it's really important that the workplace acknowledges that, and that those co-workers want to support the person who's going through this grief of whatever kind it is. And I think the workplace needs to adapt how we're allowed to support our co-workers. I was in a workplace where, just as I was becoming ill with my chronic illness, fibromyalgia, the manager said to me in a meeting when I wasn't able to function at work properly, and she said to me, "Oh, well, you don't look
Yeah.
depressed." And I thought, it just broke me at that point, thinking, what? Just because I wear makeup
Mm.
to hide a lot of what I'm feeling does not mean I'm not depressed. And in that moment, and you know, I just saw the lack of compassion in that moment. And when she left the room, I just broke down in tears. I phoned my husband, and he says, "What on earth has she said to you?" I told him, and he says, "Right, you need to speak to the head of the department." And I couldn't leave the room because I was crying so
Yeah.
much. And I had to email a colleague of mine who I was close to. She came in, she brought me tissues and everything. She goes, "Right, you need to speak to the head of the department, head of change.
Mm.
I was a in project management at the time." She came in and she said, "I want you to go to the doctors tomorrow, get signed off, take time and understand what's happening to you at the moment." I ended up being off for 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
I was fully paid for those 6 months. She did adhere to that because obviously it was what the comments at the work in the workplace that had knocked me over the edge, and it was during that time. Luckily, I had private medical insurance with the company at the time, and was able to get diagnosed, have the MRIs, see a consultant and everything, and then got formally diagnosed with fibromyalgia.
Yeah.
But that ended my career.
Yes.
It ended life as I knew it. And the support element, aftercare, is not there necessarily either. How much of this, like, sort of mental health aspect in the workplace now, chronic illnesses, is more prevalent than it has been before? In your line of work, how much have you seen that come about?
So I think the start point for me with all of this, first of all, is because you were talking about budgets a little while ago. The, a company does have no greater asset than the people that work for it,
Yeah.
and the minute that they realise that, the world starts to change.
Yes.
I think mental health and mental health training should almost be a given. As I say, we talk a lot around, there's so much training going into businesses at the moment about equality, and mental health training should be a given, unless you're comfortable as a business that you know how to identify and deal with mental health issues. Very important to understand, A, what the condition is medically, but then B, what the impact is going to be on the workplace, but C, what adjustments can be made. Because actually, if you've got a great member of staff who, is completely committed to the organisation and performs really well for you, if there's an underlying medical condition, but with a small adjustment, whatever it might be, and it could be anything, but if you let them coming to work late so they can avoid the school run, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Just things like this, because the other thing is, there's absolutely nothing wrong with employees being proud of where they're working.
Mm.
And this comes back to what we've been speaking about all the way through about grief, but also from a health point of view. As an employee, excuse me, your loyalty to your company will quite often be determined by how they react the first time you need them.
Yeah.
And be it grief, be it, you've been off, you know, with a medical condition, whatever it may be, if you come out as the employee, if you come out of that chain of events thinking they really looked after me, that company has done itself a massive favour.
In my mind, losing a talented, proactive, somebody who knows the company inside out, that kind of person for a company is a greater loss than retraining somebody, hiring somebody, the cost of all of that. You'd know better than me. That
Yes.
would be the way round,
Yeah.
wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So investing in them is far more important than being proactive rather than reactive.
If you've got a relationship with your employee where they actually like coming to work, they're paid fairly, but it's not always about the money. If you've got their buy-in to you as an employer, and they can see the values that you're showing, again, you're doing yourself such a favor.
Mm.
And I think the other thing is, in terms of what you're doing, and the support you're giving, the other big thing that's sometimes forgotten is when we're dealing with things like grief, or with employees' mental health, or things like that, we've also got to make sure that the manager, or whoever it is that's dealing with that, we can get them to the stage where they know how to deal with that and support the employee, etc. But we also need to make sure that at the end of the conversation, the manager feels comfortable,
Yes.
because it could be bringing all sorts of things home to them, or
Yeah.
they could have gone through that, or whatever it might
Yeah.
be. And I've had scenarios in the corporate world where line managers have had a phone call on the Sunday evening from an individual who's, I've had enough, things have got on top of me, I'm sat by the side of the railway line. Genuine conversation, and the managers had the training and did fine, got the individual, that was all sorted. Nobody gave a thought to how that manager then spends his Sunday evening thinking, what the hell's happened to my colleague for the
Mm.
rest of the night?
Yeah.
And how have they got to there, and all of that.
Yeah.
It was almost like, oh well, we've sorted the issue with the employee, great. We often leave the managers to
Yeah.
fend for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's right. You're so right, because they take the toll off the team, don't they? I think back at my time when Luca passed away, and my brother made the call to my manager at the time. So it was my first day of my maternity leave. And I knew that the company needed to know what had happened. So I said to my brother, this is who you need to speak to. Ask for this person. Here's the number, this, that. And when I then met him, he said the shock of what had happened to you, because obviously they'd sent me off on Friday with this lovely maternity basket and everything, filled with lots of lovely things, done beautifully. And then Monday, Luca passed away.
Yeah.
They found out, I think, Tuesday or the Wednesday, from my brother. And they were expecting him to say, oh, the baby's come
Yeah.
2 weeks early.
Yeah.
He's here already. Instead, they got, actually, the baby's passed away.
Yeah.
And he said the whole office just stopped
Yeah.
in that moment. And I didn't return back to the company. He says, you could, when I met him, I says, can we just meet for coffee somewhere? Because I don't want to come in and see everybody, because it's going to be extremely emotional. Because my first visit back to the office would have been with my baby. And I don't think sometimes those considerations are often placed in the workplace, are they, as well? And one of the things that our bereavement midwife said to us to my husband Jazz was at the time, um, when you go back to work, everyone will ask how your wife is
Yes.
rather than how you are.
Yes.
And so there's definitely a gap in the workplace of men's feelings. I mean, this is only going back 12 years ago, and I know it hasn't improved
Yes.
since.
Yeah.
There's certainly a gap where management need to look after male mental health.
There's also the fact that how did your colleagues at the time react to that news? Because, a lot of in that scenario, a lot of them would have shared the joy on the Friday as you were leaving, and would have been looking forward to the photos and you coming back in, and suddenly they're having to deal with that.
Yeah,
Now, the company won't have given that the consideration that it gave to making sure that you were as well looked after as you could be.
yeah,
But again, it's that kind of, the person who's dealing with the grief is number one, but then how how's the pool around them dealing with
yeah.
it?
So when we had our big AGM earlier
Yep.
this year, we talked about our unique teddy bear, the Endless Love teddy bear that I designed based on me wanting to always hold something of Luca and cuddle. So I designed this unique teddy bear as coming from a HR perspective. You said these hampers, these well-being hampers and the teddy bear, etc., would be a good replacement for sending, rather than sending flowers when somebody's going through some form of grief, like we said, any type of grief. Um, Replace flowers with this well-being hamper, which obviously can be of different things. It can be obviously the teddy bear, the well-being sort of pillow mist and bath salts, all of those different various different things that we have in a variety of the packages. You were quite key to that, which I was really, really pleased about, because you were the one who suggested the bereavement shop, which we've now set up as an extension to support the charity. Do you think this will pick up from HR departments to say, actually, yeah, we're going to go and send a well-being hamper instead of flowers to this individual?
I think it's very difficult because naturally you think, I want to say sorry, I want to send a sympathy card, I want to get some flowers in the post, and that's coming from a good place always, because it's with the right intention.
Yes.
The bit you can't legislate for is how the individual will react to that. And flowers are very, very interesting because for so long it's been the standalone gesture, if you will. It's
Yeah.
like, what do we do? If somebody has a birthday, you've got so many options, but actually it's flowers in terms of loss. The hamper is just, for me, it shows is genuine thought gone into it,
Yeah.
rather than um, you know we're going to do what everybody does. However you do this, ultimately what you're doing is saying, loads of love to you, can't imagine what you're going through, this is from us, so that can never be a bad thing,
Yeah.
because it's with the right intentions. The corporate world can be so process driven and so kind of like sterile, that actually the bigger the company gets, the less personable it can get.
Yeah.
And if you've got a an account with a florist, etc., and you've got, depending on the occasion, you send this bouquet or that bouquet out, it's almost like it's taken the emotion out of it a little bit.
Yeah.
It's almost become too clinical. So suddenly you're in a position where you can actually turn around and say, this was just a bit different.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's that.
Yeah. It's that, yeah, like you said, it's that added touch that they've actually gone somewhere
Yeah.
different. They've thought about what I'm probably going through, what probably things I'll probably be needing. Um, and on that note, obviously, we want to say that for all companies, no matter what size you are, grief, whilst we have Grief Awareness Week in the beginning of December every year, grief awareness is actually every day. So we encourage you to go to our bereavement shop, and all the proceeds of those hampers go back into the Luca Foundation, they'll appreciate having you sent something more personal for them that's going to last them months, as opposed to a few days when the flowers wilt away. So do go onto our website, it's bereavementshop.com, and there's a selection of hampers there, all sorts of sizes and different content in each box. You can take which one ever you want, purchase it, we will deliver it, all packaged up really nicely, and do something different. Be the company that is not sending flowers anymore, but sending a well-being hamper. Thank you.